Our first speaker is Cole Costello. He's a PhD student at the University of Montana, and he focuses on labor and ethnicity in the American West. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, specifically the Irish nationalist presence within mining unions. He's originally from Hubbard, Oregon, and he was drawn to Montana because of its mining history. So his talk is A More Perfect Union, Ed Boyce and the Western Federation of Miners. Cole?
Thank you, Jeff, and good morning, everybody. So I am Cole, and my speech is A More Perfect Union, Ed Boyce and the Western Federation of Miners. In July 1892, thousands of miners clashed with mine owners and strike-breaking agents in the Idaho Panhandle protesting wage cuts. Neither the motivations for the strike nor its failure were as important as the strike's ultimate message for the miners: the government's support of big business by dispatching Pinkertons and placing the region under martial law left workers unprotected. And neither the small Coeur d'Alene Miners Union, which called the strike, nor the Butte Miners Union, which aided the strike from Montana, had enough power to fight the changing tide. After all, the union itself was infiltrated by disguised agents. The miners knew something had to change. Federal troops placed many miners in temporary holding cells near Kellogg, Idaho. The holding cells, known as bullpens, were rough lumber structures 2 stories high. In the words of Bill Haywood, no sanitation was provided, and the excrement of the men above dripped through the cracks in the plank floor on the men below. While in prison, the men started to plot a federation for all miners and smelter employees, and imagined how this federation would help their cause. Upon release, the small group agreed to meet in Butte with representatives from a spectrum of mining communities. Among these imprisoned men who dreamt of an industrial union representing the miners and metal workers of the West was Ed Boyce, and this union became the Western Federation of Miners. Ed Boyce, an Irish immigrant turned miner turned labor leader, is one of labor history's understudied figures, yet his legacy can be seen across the 20th century. William Big Bill Haywood, a figure so well studied in labor that his Industrial Workers of the World became synonymous with militant unionism, entered unions after hearing Boyce speak. Boyce remained an influence on Haywood's ideology through the founding of the IWW in 1905. By then, Boyce had stepped back from labor and become a luxury hotel owner. Later, Haywood fled to the Soviet Union and died a martyr. The wildly different conclusions to their stories have contributed to an imbalance in the scholarship. While Big Bill looms larger than life, scholars have neglected Boyce's influence on union politics. Historian David Emmons has written that Boyce understood better than most that soulless corporations had a particular fondness for borderlands and frontiers. The agrarian dream was frustrated not just because England had defrauded the Irish of their nation, but because Western American corporations were so uncommonly rapacious. Emmons has recently claimed that Boyce's contributions have been underexamined. Boyce's role in American labor politics has been noted, but his relegation to others, such as Haywood, underscores how powerful his impact was. Divisions between older mining unions that were largely ethnic in character often played a somewhat conservative foe to newer industrial unions. Boyce was forced to reckon with these conservative ethnic unions, and as an Irish immigrant himself, could not have been blind to their demands. As president of the Western Federation of Miners from 1896 to 1902, Boyce encouraged and promoted major shifts in its ideology. Under Boyce, the union advanced radical ideas among organized labor. In addition to advocating sabotage and advising miners to arm themselves, the union parted with the American Federation of Labor and Samuel Gompers, and strained its relationship with the conservative-leaning, company-friendly Butte Miners Union. By the end of his presidency, Boyce had moved the WFM from Butte to Denver. The result was that the union avoided influence from the powerful Anaconda Copper Company, which dominated Butte politics. Under Boyce, the WFM also became a leader in the national labor conversation, pushing for the IWW's creation. From 1896 to 1902, the WFM shifted dramatically militant, in many ways defining what a radical labor union would later be. Ed Boyce's presidency deeply shifted the course of the WFM and American labor movements. By the end of his presidency, the WFM had become the most powerful single union in the West. Ed Boyce's Irish background was essential to understanding his influences. For many Irish who came to the U.S., Irish nationalism and a syncretic blend of Catholicism with ancient tradition dominated how they viewed the world. Born in Donegal in 1862, Boyce's childhood would have been shaped by the recent famine. Donegal was among the hardest hit counties. Though the potato blight and starvation was at its peak in the late 1840s, Ireland faced decades of outmigration. Boyce was one among many who felt forced to leave. Unlike many who left, Boyce went back. By the 1900s, Boyce was making frequent trips to visit family. Many immigrants professed desires to eventually return home, but few followed through or achieved the means. Boyce's trips back to Ireland reveal 3 points. He had moderate financial success as the WFM president, he kept close relations with family there, and that the Emerald Isle never left his mind. In this third point, he was not alone in America. Following the famine, the U.S. experienced an influx of immigration like never before. Prior to 1847, most immigration was composed of English, Scots-Irish, and German settlers, the shared characteristic being Protestantism. Later Irish immigrants practiced an ancient communal form of Catholicism tied to traditional mythology, collectivity, and extended family structures. Many barely spoke English. From the perspective of Anglo-Americans, who fashioned themselves natives in response, the newcomers were impossibly different and ill-suited to American life. By the 1850s, communities of Irish immigrants formed in cities of the Northeast, and due to their large numbers, the working class slowly took on an Irish character. The Irish presence in the West was also larger than is typically portrayed. The westward movement could be viewed through the growth of mining industries. Whether incidental or not, Irish immigrants came to dominate mining labor. Most Irish arrivals came through New York or Boston, and the anthracite region of Pennsylvania was a short train ride away. Scranton-Wilkes-Barre soon supported a large Irish population. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan was populated by Irish, who made it the largest copper producer in the country. By the 1880s, Irish mining enclaves were across the West, with many in Montana, Idaho, and Colorado. Boyce was a textbook example of the Westering mining Irish. Arriving in America in 1882, Boyce was already at work in the mines of Leadville by 1883. Boyce worked in several different mining towns with frequent union activity, before briefly acting as a populist politician in Idaho. Boyce's disillusionment by the party's focus on free silver led him back into organizing, and at the 1896 convention of the Western Federation of Miners, the union he helped found 3 years prior, he was elected president. Though Boyce was familiar with Marx and Engels, he drew just as much, if not more, influence from Irish nationalists like James Connolly and Patrick Ford. Especially among Catholics, Irish nationalism was nearly ubiquitous, and expressions of this ideology could be seen in actions by Irish in America for generations. Ford, a self-styled exile from Ireland, published the Irish World and American Industrial Liberator from New York City. The Irish World combined Irish nationalist rhetoric, news for its diasporic population, and left-leaning politics. For readers, the topics were indistinguishable. The effects of Irish nationalist beliefs on unionization movements of the late 19th century played a significant role. Boyce's career represented the culmination of many Irish nationalist beliefs in American labor politics, and his impact on what would become industrial unionism imbued the movement with these tenets. When Boyce assumed the presidency, the Western Federation of Miners was still unproven. Many saw the Young Umbrella Union as a fledgling organization that would not last. Yet he began to enact changes, first in affiliating with the American Federation of Labor. The AFL, under the leadership of Samuel Gompers, was a national force. By affiliating under the AFL, Boyce was guaranteeing greater support that the WFM needed. Further, the early years of Boyce's presidency were nearly all on the road. Boyce found many like minds and organized dozens of new unions, each affiliated under the WFM. Boyce spoke at most stops, and his words found many sympathetic ears. such as Bill Haywood. Haywood was born in Salt Lake City 3 months before the completion of the Transcontinental, and his childhood was characterized by tragedy. At age 3, his father died of a mining-related illness. Later, he was present when a classmate accidentally shot and killed another while playing, and while trying to construct a slingshot, Haywood slipped a knife into his right eye, leaving him half blind. This all occurred before he entered the mines himself at age 9. Haywood was 27, with an arm 2 months healed from an accident nearly requiring amputation when he first heard Boyce speak. Boyce stopped in Silver City, Idaho on August 6, 1896, for a weekend of organizing. Haywood attended meetings on both the 8th and the 10th, unsure if his work injuries would ever allow him in the mines again. Boyce told the story of the 1892 Coeur d'Alene strike, his time in the maggot-infested bullpens, and the WFM's purpose. Boyce's visit resulted in the chartering of the Silver City Miners Union and the blossoming of a long friendship with Big Bill. Haywood was elected a member of the Finance Committee, his first union role. Haywood later noted the first meetings he attended with the WFM were a significant point of demarcation in his life. In his words, "I keenly realized the importance of the revolutionary labor movement, and now had a deeper understanding of the struggles that had been made and the sacrifices demanded of the workers in their efforts to emancipate themselves from wage slavery." Haywood's journey towards this understanding was tied with Boyce's experience and worldview. While traveling, Boyce would entertain other union leaders with stories of labor's past. From Boyce, Haywood learned the history of the Knights of Labor, Marx's First International, and the trouble he felt brewing with mine owners in the region. Several months after Boyce's presidency began, the WFM would be tested. Since forming, the highest profile engagement for the WFM had been a strike in Cripple Creek, Colorado, under uniquely favorable circumstances. When the Federation decided to support strikers in nearby Leadville in 1896, none could have predicted how pivotal this would become. The Western Federation of Miners came out of Colorado a different union, led directly by Ed Boyce's radicalism. The Cloud City Miners Union in Leadville was a new affiliation with the WFM when it called its first strike. Barely a year old, the CCMU were working towards a raise in their daily wages until negotiations stalled. During a meeting in June 1896, the union voted to strike. For several months, the strike played out similarly to previous local actions. WFM-affiliated unions across the region sent funds to support the strikers, with Butte a primary benefactor. However, unknown to the miners or the unions, the mine owners had already agreed to not negotiate with the unions any longer. The owners also planned to ship in strikebreakers to continue operations at the old wage scale. Unaware, the union remained optimistic. In the 1890s, Colorado politics featured impressive results from the populists, with some politicians explicitly supporting strikes. The 1894 Cripple Creek strike ended successfully for the unions after Governor Waite, a populist, brought in the National Guard in protection of striking miners. Waite pressured the mine owners to give in to the union demands. The populist movement in Colorado benefited miners, but this was an anomaly. It was no longer 1894, and Waite no longer governor. The state would not support the strikers in Leadville. With failure looming, a handful of men acted. In September, dynamite was thrown into the Coronado mine. Open fire ensued for over an hour. After the dust settled, the only fatalities were 3 Union men, all strikebreakers escaping safely. But the damages were extreme. The mine sat in ruins. The National Guard arrived to now protect the companies. Leadville remained under martial law until springtime, when the unions, under advice from Boyce, officially ended the strike. This failure forced the union to re-examine its methods. All the increased support from a widespread network succeeded in doing was prolonging the work stoppage, and some support never came. Boyce began to critique the AFL. Leadville represented a watershed in union ideology. What Boyce really became critical of was trade unionism. By the mid-1890s, regional unions had begun to group together under larger national unions. Syndicalism, or the belief that unions should organize together under massive international structures, is the same belief at the root of unionization, that workers were more powerful in numbers. The first repercussion of the strike was the Western Federation of Miners' soured relationship with the American Federation of Labor. The AFL promised aid to the Leadville strikers, but the aid never arrived. This insult created a fissure that would last decades. After the strike's end, Samuel Gompers, president of the AFL, wrote to Boyce addressing the rumors that the AFL would disaffiliate. Boyce's response outlined precisely where he now stood. There is an easier way of winning the battles of labor, much easier than sitting down in idleness until the capitalist starves us to death in idleness and hunger. Do not think me egotistical when I say that I think the laboring men of the West are 100 years ahead of their brothers in the East. Boyce's belief that the workers of the West were 100 years more advanced than Easterners reflects a clear understanding of how industrialization changed the nature of work, particularly in mining. Mining labor was now mechanized, and workers low-skilled and replaceable. Boyce explained to Gompers how this became clear to him when he attended their convention in Cincinnati the prior year. I was never so much surprised in my life as I was when I sat and listened to the delegates from the East talk about conservative action, when 4 million idle men and women are tramps upon the highways. I am not a trades unionist. I am fully convinced that their days of usefulness is past. And furthermore, since last election, there is little sympathy existing between laboring men of the West and their Eastern brothers. Boyce saw trade unionism as capitulation, and that labor issues were a battle that needed fought with action. Industrial miners needed more than it had to offer. Early organizing in the U.S. was often trade unionist, where members of a certain trade or craft bound together. In the current industrialized world of mining, craft production did not exist and tradesmen were not needed. Within an industrial union, all employees, whether skilled or unskilled, were bound together and under the same representatives. In Boyce's mind, and the minds of many left-wing labor leaders to follow, trade unionism offered an ill-suited solution for both the mining industry and labor in general. Leading up to the annual convention, Boyce was quoted in the Butte Miner. "The days of strikes is over anyhow. The Leadville strike settled that point as far as the miners are concerned, as that was one of the greatest ever had in the Federation, and it was fought out as long as there was any hope of winning. But it was finally let go, and the condition of the men made worse instead of better. The physical industrial forces of the country were never more active than at present, and the conditions will become adjusted sometime, but just how, no man can tell." Boyce's conclusion that the days of strikes is over had profound implications. At the WFM annual convention, Boyce presented ideas indicating he'd been thinking on how these conditions will become adjusted. In May 1897, the WFM met in Salt Lake City. The first matter of business was the union's affiliation with the AFL, which was dropped. The AFL's failure to follow through on providing aid during the Leadville strike proved too much to forgive. By leaving the AFL and condemning trade unionism, the WFM became a leader for industrial organizing. In his report, Boyce planted one last word of advice. With thoughts of union members killed in a shootout with strikebreakers in Leadville, Boyce took the stage. "I deem it important to direct your attention to Article 2 of the Constitutional Amendments of the United States. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This you should comply with immediately. Every union should have a rifle club. I strongly advise you to provide every member with the latest improved rifle, which can be obtained from the factory at a nominal price. I entreat you to take action on this important question so that in 2 years we can hear the inspiring music of the martial tread of 25,000 armed men in the ranks of labor." Leadville directly informed this support of rifle clubs. If the National Guard was now on the side of business, Boyce saw no option than to form their own guards. This departed from many traditional ideas about the role and practice of labor unions. Labor demonstrations did provoke violence, but not often by design, and even less frequently by leaders' advice. Several days later, a reporter approached Eugene Debs, who was at the meeting, for his thoughts. By now, Debs and Boyce were close friends. They likely met during the 1892 Coeur d'Alene strike and worked in organizing populists in the West. On his way to the 1896 AFL convention, Boyce stayed at Debs' home in Indiana. By the early 1900s, the two were exchanging holiday cards. When asked about Boyce's speech, Debs retorted, "It has no special significance. The Constitution says people may bear arms, so there is nothing unlawful about it." When pressed by the reporter, Debs elaborated, "You must bear in mind labor has practically no rights when compared with capital. The latter controls everything. Why should not the working classes improve their condition in every way? I see nothing in Mr. Boyce's attitude, or in that of the organization he represents, that is not in perfect harmony with the Constitution of our country." Following the collapse of the Populists and the rise of the Socialist Party under Debs, many Western radicals began to see Boyce as a beacon. Many called for him to run for governor of Colorado as Socialist. Boyce's Rifle Club speech represented a dramatic shift in labor ideology. His dream of the martial tread of labor inspired countless future radical leaders, not the least his secretary-treasurer with the WFM, Bill Haywood. In 1897, Boyce led the radicals. As a mining town, Butte was paramount, unique, and a model for all other communities at once. In 20 years, Butte grew from a mining camp to an industrial city, the largest in the region. At the root of this transformation was Marcus Daly. Daly, an Irish immigrant, spent his childhood selling newspapers on the streets of New York, and then headed west into the mines. While in Virginia City, Nevada, he developed a preternatural eye for ore, and he became prominent as an assessor. After Daly first visited Butte in the 1870s, he insisted on investing alongside his San Francisco-based financiers. There was something there that he'd never seen. Butte's labor history was also unique. The BMU was one of the first local mining unions in the West. Contemporary scholars even considered the BMU to be the father of the IWW. But the BMU was unique. It had more similarities to Irish clubs and associations. Many early mining unions were based around shared ethnic connections, often Cornish, Welsh, or Irish, three ethnic peoples who happened to have a history of mining in their home countries. But in Butte, this ethnic role had an even greater impact. The Butte Irish dominated the city. Around Daly's presence, Butte became a preeminent destination for Irish immigrants. Anaconda Copper, Daly's company, loomed large over the city, with officers and executives Irish to nearly a man. The BMU often overlapped in its officers with Anaconda, producing curious results. Though the ethnically based conservative unions ethnically based conservative unions elsewhere occasionally exercised conservatism, the BMU's close ties with Anaconda went further. BMU miners were well paid, old or infirm workers were taken care of, and strikes were never called. These practices would never be possible without Butte's tremendous Irish population. The BMU would not follow the path that Boyce began to tread. This conflict, with roots in ethnic identity, class awareness, and conflicting conceptions of organized labor, was at the basis of Boyce's decision to move the WFM headquarters from Butte to Denver. Starting with Boyce's Rifle Club speech, the BMU had become increasingly uneasy about its relationship with the WFM, and local reactions could be found in support of both. Readers of the Western Mining World, published out of Butte, will be pleased to note that the reports coming from the annual meeting rather condemn the hotheads who are holding the principal offices. If the Federation of Miners wish to retain the goodwill of every law-abiding citizen, they will at once fire Boyce bodily, as he is the greatest enemy of labor ever had in the West. Boyce went on to win the next 3 elections for presidency uncontested. The Great Falls leader regrets exceedingly the actions of the Western Federation of Miners in electing Boyce again. Regrets it because it believes that in doing so the Federation has done the cause of unified labor a great injury. This man Boyce is a traitor to the country of his adoption, and in reality an enemy to the labor unions in whose behalf he claims to be speaking. Labor, lacking sufficient breadth of view to realize the duties and possibilities of an American citizen, he cannot be a thorough Union man, for being the latter should make him all the more a better member of the Union. This assault on Boyce came together in a question of whether he was fit to run the WFM. On returning to Butte, delegates to the convention were questioned by the Daily Post. They were reluctant to say much. Boyce had not yet even returned. But they cautioned no alarm need be felt, that the views expressed were those of one man in the organization. The relations between capital and labor in Butte were and would continue to be friendly. Other miners, such as Charles Bonner of Phillipsburg, defended the stance of his president. Bonner noted how the capitalistic press had been having an unfair field day with Boyce, painting him as the greatest enemy society ever had. Bonner suggested that Boyce stands for law and order. He knows full well that when working men parade the streets waving the black flag and the red one threatening the destruction of life and property, it in no way advances the cause we are engaged in. Based on a private conversation with Boyce, Bonner believed that his rhetoric was based around eradicating ignorance. Rather than violence, this drive for education drove Boyce's impulse. Responding to the Western mining world, the bystander again came to Boyce's defense, noting that most of the convention endorsed and adopted the so-called hotheads themselves. In direct support, the bystander pled for readers to consider the miners' experiences. We remember how the mining companies in the Coeur d'Alenes, at Bull Hill, and Leadville had recourse to their constitutional privilege to carry arms long before any trouble occurred. The mine owners evince a disposition to avail themselves of it. Now it seems to us necessity exists for the miners in turn to avail themselves also of this right to maintain wages. If the mine owners could arm themselves to protect their interests, why should the miners arming themselves be an issue? Recalling Deb's response to Boyce's speech, the miners were simply following their rights. The Butte Miners Union did not see it this way. Boyce returned to find the Butte Miners Union incensed. In his diary, Boyce noted perhaps his language was too strong to suit Daly, and now the Daly-aligned Butte Miners Union questioned their increasingly radical Federation president. In June, BMU President M.J. Burke motioned to withdraw from the WFM. Burke was Irish-born, president of the BMU and Butte's Ancient Order of Hibernians, and stood at the forefront of Butte's anti-rifle club faction, with Marcus Daly in the ACM behind him. Another source of contention came from Boyce's allegiance to socialism. Debs, Boyce's good friend, was the most visible socialist in the United States, and Boyce had increasingly pushed the WFM towards socialist principles. A frequent division among Irish Catholics in America was the split between the working class and the lace curtain Irish. The lace curtain Irish purchased land, comported themselves as higher class, and hung lace curtains in their windows. Some, like Daly, were accused of being just as incorrigible as landlords in Ireland once were. Others, such perhaps as M.J. Burke, saw Daly's path as a possibility and acted accordingly. Boyce was the latest interpretation of an Irish collectivist left, drawing inspiration from ancient Irish tradition, modern labor activism, and the political issues of the late 19th century. Burke's motion to disaffiliate with the WFM failed. Yet Burke also motioned to evict the WFM from use of Butte's Union Hall. This passed. The WFM were kicked out of Butte and settled in Denver. Following Daly's death, some in Butte started a memorial fund to erect a monument in his honor. If Marcus Daly ever did anything in his life for the working men of Nevada, Utah, and Montana, where he lived, Boyce wrote from Denver, we have never heard of it. Like millions of his countrymen, Marcus Daly was forced to leave the land of his birth on account of an unjust tyrannical system of landlordism and oppression, and no sooner had he accumulated wealth than he became the equal of the worst Irish landlord that ever lived. The impact from Ed Boyce's presidency of the WFM left many shockwaves. 1897 represented the crux of this explosion. The strike in Leadville was devastating for the WFM and Western labor, yet it also forged a new idea of what unions could be and how they could act. Industrial unionism and direct action would now dominate labor discourse. Looking beyond this moment, labor still felt Boyce's influence. Haywood, Boyce's protege, supported violent action, and that would arguably be his undoing. Ed Boyce, president of the Western Federation of Miners, opened a chapter of labor history that has never fully been resolved. Thank you.